З 7 по 10 жовтня у Львові відбудеться 18-й екуменічний соціальний тиждень «Розвиток сталих інституцій в часи війни, цінності, самозарадність та партнерство».
Форум відбувається з ініціативи Інституту екуменічних студій Українського католицького університету у співпраці із фондом Конрада Аденауера в Україні та Євангелічною церквою Німеччини.
Роль інституцій в часі війни, досягнення соціальної згуртованості та прогресу в часи кризи та невизначеності, свідчення стійкості державних, освітніх, релігійних, культурних і громадських інституцій. Ці та інші питання обговорять експерти з України та за кордону.
В рамках міжнародного форуму відбудуться круглі столи, панельні дискусії, семінари, виставки, майстер-класи. Запрошуємо молодь, активних громадян, студентів, освітян, журналістів, представників релігійних та громадських організацій до участі.
Реєстрація та деталі на сайті is.uku.edu.ua. Форум відбудеться у гібридному форматі – наживо та онлайн.
Glory to Jesus Christ. This is going to be the last event of this day for us. So, yes, those of you who decided to stay, of course, we understand that you will be saved. This is another event, the seminar of the Ukrainian Christian Academic Society. The topic is the development of Synodal order in Ukrainian Greek Catholic and Orthodox churches, a comparison. The plan was to have the seminar in line with the processes which take place in Greek Catholic Church, starting with the Second Council of the Vatican. We understand that synodality became the focus of attention. It was a gradual process that we had bishop conferences established. We still have these conferences, but they are a consulting body. And then in times of Pope Francis, again, we started a discussion of synodality for Eastern Christianity. Synodality is not something new. The churches of the cave tradition in Ukraine, they lived the synodal life in their own way, of course. That is why it is interesting for us to compare the experience of Greek Catholics with their impact, the experience of Orthodox churches. Both churches, have they developed synodality in their structures? But we were also interested in the way the Greek Catholic Church developed its structures in diaspora, because we know that when it was under ban here, it was very active. Beyond Ukraine, it was interesting for us to see the key trends that we see these days. Not only the trends probably, but how it got developed, maybe some general information. What is the current situation, and what is the change that one needs, and what are the prospects or plans for the future? That is why today with us we have 4 panelists in this session, our seminar. We have Reverend Dr. Ivan Datsko, the president of the UC Institute of Ecumenical Studies, Reverend Dr. Oleg Hortak, lecturer at the Chernobyl Higher Theological Seminary. He's very modest, that's all that we have. Professor Volodymyr Braha, Vice Rector of the Kiev Theological Academy, and Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun, who is going to join us online. So the plan is to start in the following way. We will start with the Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun, who will present the general overview of the evolution of synodality. Then Ivan Datsko, Oleg Hortak, Volodymyr Braha. So I would like to pass the floor to Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun. The floor is yours. I also would like to remind our panelists that we also have simultaneous interpretation available. That is why we ask you probably not to be too fast for interpreters to catch up with your pace. I think that, yes, that is something that you already know. The floor is yours. Thank you. My greetings to all the participants of your conference. This is an important conference that we have. It's important that it takes place in the context that you have just described, or reflections over the concept of synodality of Greek Catholic Church. And we know that a lot of people listen to the East in this respect, though what works is it's more about theory than practice, especially now. However, I think that some people they listen to Eastern theories as well. In my speech, I would like to focus on a more general overview of the phenomenon of synodality, which is under discussion at this seminar. So I'm going to start now. I think that we can compare synodality to a mosaic. Probably, yes. Byzantine mosaics, there are very many nice copies in Rome, but it all started in the East. It's very similar to the concept of synodality. It really thrived in the East, and now it's being copied in the West. That is why I decided to have synodality compared to a mosaic. If you look closely at the details of a mosaic, then you will notice more regularities of shapes and color. You will notice sharp edges and some other imperfections of tesserae. These are the small stones that make up the mosaic, and you can even cut yourself with tesserae. This is how sharp they are. If you touch these stones, then you can harm yourself. The same goes for synodality. The beauty of a mosaic can only be appreciated from a distance when you have your hat held high. The same goes for synodality. Uh, In all cathedrals, including the Cathedral of Nicaea, and we celebrate 1700 Jubilee of the First Council of Nicaea. I actually have spoken about the Council of Nicaea recently, and I focused not only on the achievements that we highly appreciate in the Council of Nicaea, but also the imperfections, those uneven edges, uneven color which is used in the mosaic of the cathedral in Nicaea. But when we put all of them together, all these small stones, tesserae, we can see a breathtaking picture. When we consider synodality and we see it at a distance and we see it as a process which is a century-long process from the perspective of many centuries, then of course it is really striking, and it is really something which takes our breath away. But when we take a look at it from a closer perspective, we will see all imperfections, and well, maybe they make this general picture even richer and more versatile. These tesserae sometimes have different origins. Also, I would like to say that the earliest form of synodality, which could be identified in the times of apostles, was the network of communities that was formed actually and founded by the apostles. What these communities might have been like is evident from Paul's correspondence with his circle. And in this circle, the network, its members, they shared some memories about their founders and also the stories the founders told. These memories and these stories, they were retold, they were shared within the circle and between other circles and networks. This is how the first Christian scriptures emerged. The apostolic epistles, which began to circulate even before the gospel. We know about Paul and his original scriptures, the original ones. his epistles, they were before the gospel, and they can be considered the first Christian texts. It was written as a means of communication or synodality between the networks. They were closely connected, and they were known as founders of the networks. Then we had some epistles which were attributed to Paul. They circulated to the same networks created by Paul. They were identified as those belonging to him. Of course, if to speak about the New Testament, the apostolic epistles were one of the first examples of synodality. We can say that these were the first forms of synodality. Also, we can say the same about the gospel. That is why we know that it is about synodal church which has the right. However, the early Christian scriptures did not yet call the assembly in Jerusalem a council. There was a special event that was during the first Christian century. It is described in the book, and apostles participated in this event, and that was the only event which was known for the first century. Maybe there were some other gatherings, but we are not aware of them. The apostles gathered to discuss the further strategy of the development of communities, followers of Jesus Christ, whether for the church to be within the framework of Judaism or to go beyond it. And of course, it was very important for many other gatherings, and they will later be known as councils. That will become a modus operandi of the church. And the Jerusalem Council, well, the assembly in Jerusalem was not a council, as I already mentioned. That was the interpretation that we had after that, that was indeed a council, and it became a prototype for other councils. But that was an assembly, a council of apostles, of bishops, and their followers. That was not the only form of synodality. As I mentioned, the earlier form of synodality were the collections of texts and holy scriptures. They mentioned the term council was not used. The Christian church began to use the Greek word synomus and the Latin concilium, concilium in Italian, or concilium. Yes, if to consider some earlier forms of pronunciation to designate their assemblies later in the 3rd century. In both words, they enter the theological vocabulary almost simultaneously and in the same region, North Africa. Bishop Dionysius of Alexandria, 200-265, was one of the first authors to mention synodos in the sense of a council. Around the same time, Tertullian, whom I have already mentioned, who lived between 155 and the year 220, in his treatise De Iunia Adversus Psychicus, mentions concilia in the same meaning, in the same sense. So we can see that it's almost simultaneous how this word was applied. It coincides with the beginning of the use of the term ecclesia, which was not translated by Tertullian. He just used this term ecclesia. Also, it's important to mention that other Alexandrians, Clement and Origen, also used the term synodos. However, they did not apply it to church councils. And let's make a note that we speak about Alexandria. So these terms were used to denote various kinds of unity, for example, between husband and wife. So they spoke about family, synodos, something that represents unity, or the unity between body and soul. When we speak about synodos as something that represent the unity of humans. Until the third century, there are no recorded use of the word synodos in the Safe Council in Christian writings. This is in times of a pre-Jerusalem assembly, and you know that it was not the term that was used. It is only in the third century that these church assemblies were already known as councils. And we can find this term in pagan literature. One of the first mentions we can find in Ceylon, that is the 6th, the 7th centuries before Christ. Other ancient authors, in particular Plato and Aristotle, use this term quite often, and Aristotle used it um, even more often than Plato. This means that the church, in borrowing the word from classical ancient times, demonstrated the same boldness and openness as in adopting other key terms in theology as hypostasis or ousia. Then, as part of the discussion of the First Council of Nicaea, we really discussed how bold it was to use these terms hypostas and ousia, because these are such ambivalent terms, and they carry some pagan load and legacy, and the same goes for synods, because it was also associated with pagans, and there was a certain risk here of the fathers of church to borrow these terms for their vocabulary, the vocabulary of the church. Hypostasis and ousia might be seen by us as Christian ones, but at that time there was some suspicions as to the use of these terms. And then the church definitely started identifying itself as the word ecclesia. It is not fortuitous that both Latin words, the concilium and ecclesia, were introduced into Christian theology by the same author, Tertullian. In the classical pre-Christian tradition, the meanings of these two words, synodos and ecclesia, they were really close to each other. They both were used as synonyms. Both of them denoted an assembly. Ecclesia meant a gathering, an assembly of free citizens of a Greek polis who decided the policy of their city. Simonas meant any assembly, not necessarily political, but including one. So ecclesia was part of synodos as a more specific case of synodos as a political gathering. Modern theologians have to rediscover the internal connection between the church and the council. And here, of course, I will mention Hans Kung, Alexander Schmemann, both of them from their own perspectives that have demonstrated that the council is not simply an addition to the church. The church is the council. The root of the Greek word Simonas is road, odos. To participate in a council, a bishop have to leave his see and to set out on a journey, often long and dangerous, to reach the destination for the council to be held. Those bishops who set out on a journey to the council of our synods, those who go together. And in this sense, the word synodos was the synonym to the word synodiporos, fellow traveler. In Greek, in modern Greek, we still have synodiporos. This term is used in the meaning of a fellow traveler. In ancient Greek, the term synodos was used. Even Greeks, many of the Greeks in professors do not know about that, because when we discuss this issue, they were really surprised, because synodos, the term which in Greek is usually used in a feminine gender, and isonos, as we all know, in separate cases is used with the article "or" to denote a male gender. Even professors with whom I communicated did not know about that, but I explored these cases. When it is used as a synodos, it means a council. And then you use when you use a male gender, this is synodiporous, somebody who participates in a council as a synodal, to use the modern language. So these are synonyms, as a matter of fact. And this is exactly the same word. This is an homonym, actually, that depends on the gender. Then the meaning will be different. However, the word is the same. Yes, this is some subtlety only. I hope that those who know Greek will find it of value.
So after a long and dangerous travel, the bishops gathered together and they celebrated this event as Synodus. Tertullian uses the Latin word concilium together with the word to celebrate, celebrare or celebrare. When Tertullian uses the word concilium, he claims that you have to celebrate it, and there are many reasons to celebrate, because when a person covers the whole empire and gets safely to the place where the council is held, that's already a reason to celebrate, because you were not killed and not dropped underway. You managed there. And this way, the Roman roads played a significant role in the development of the institutions. And they played a significant role in the development of complicated administrative structures in the church and the development of the church on all its levels. And when the church, after the recognition of the Roman Empire, became the right to use the network of roads, that initiated the period of the council. So basically, the possibility of the universal councils appeared because the church got free access to the network of the roads in the empire, and that is why the councils were named in after the roads, because if there were no roads, that would have been something else, not maybe some marine roads or maybe Christian roads. Well, when we speak about the marine routes, the bishops did use them, especially when they needed to get, for example, from Italy to Asia, but then they needed to use the roads. And the councils which took place, they did take place in such port towns as, for example, Constantinople, but otherwise you still needed to use roads if you wanted to get somewhere, by land. The Christian church used not only Greek concepts and Roman roads to organize its meetings, but also the political structures of the empire. In particular, the Roman Senate and the courts became guidelines for Christian bishops. The procedures for debate and decision-making were borrowed from the Senate, and the legal procedures from the Roman courts. So these are the two sources for the procedures and protocols. So the court and the Senate, or the self-governed bodies, analogs of the Senate in the provinces. To solve certain problems of the church, the bishops had to first discuss them and then make appropriate decisions. In addition to the Holy Spirit, they relied on Roman legal procedures to ensure the fairness and legitimacy of their work. If these procedures were not properly followed, there was a risk that such a council would be declared devoid of the Holy Spirit and as a robbery. And the Holy Spirit depended very much on the procedures. If the procedure was not followed, that meant that there was no Holy Spirit, and that was a robbery of a council. And if the procedures were followed properly, then it was believed that the Holy Spirit was present at that council. Christian councils adopted from the classical institutions of antiquity not only the procedures, but also a democratic ethic. Of course, it would be anachronistic to consider the ancient councils as beacons of modern democracy. However, they did have some basic democratic procedures. For example, all their participants had equal rights to speak and vote. The so-called isagoria, which was a basic principle of the Athenian democracy. Anyone participating in this council had equal right to vote, which was rather an exception from the political practices of the time, because votes usually depended on the social status at the councils, just as at the ecclesia, and the antique in the antique policies, that nobody looked at your social background, and you had the right to speak equally, just as anyone else. The participants of these councils also spoke at the councils, understanding that they were speaking on behalf of the people. And thus they participated not only as bishops, but also as representatives of their dioceses. And this helped them to feel responsible for their flock, which is the key feature of representative democracy. So this idea of representation was a part of the DNA of these councils and had to be there. It is remarkable that Christian councils adopted and preserved these democratic procedures at a time when the same procedures were declining in the political and social spheres throughout the Roman Empire. The Senate was increasingly becoming a stage, and political offices were filled not through elections, but through appointment of officers from above, the so-called patronage, which replaced the idea of representation during the transition from the Roman Republic to the Roman Empire, and then gradually it also came to church. What is more, I would argue that church councils remained the only democratic institution in the Roman Empire when other democratic procedures were discarded under the pressure of Roman imperial culture. Even when bishops were no longer elected because of this Roman practice of patronage, and they were appointed from above, they still had this consciousness somewhere in the back of their heads, and they understood that they participated in the councils on behalf of their people, at least, the most conscientious of those. The first century council in Jerusalem was convened to address what had become a serious challenge to the integrity of the church. And the matter was the extent to which the Christian movement should remain with Judaism. And thus this council set a precedent for other councils that began to meet beginning in the 2nd century in response to new problems. Among the early issues that prompted the convention of councils in the post-apostolic era were the role of charismatic figures and the date of Easter. The first councils were characterized by their irregularity and the lack of established and unified procedures, and such councils can be characterized as ad hoc councils. The unification of the church and the empire into a single theopolitical structure at the beginning of the 4th century, or rather throughout the 4th century, because it was a long process, had a significant impact on the evolution of the conciliarity, and such councils became the most important church events for which the widest possible representation was ensured. Bishops from all corners of the oecumene were sought to participate in them. And just as roads made the Roman Empire truly universal, so the councils ensured the ecumenical character of the church. And this became possible thanks to the sponsorship of the state, which offered the church its network of roads, postal services, and other means of communication. General imperial councils required extensive preparation. It would have been impossible without state resources. That could be called imperial and should be distinguished from the ad hoc councils. Some of the imperial councils later received the name of ecumenical, while their others did not become so, or were generally considered as the illegitimate ones. Among the latter ones, for example, the council under the oak of 403, which condemned St. John Chrysostom, the council of Ephesus of 449, the council of Hierapolis, and so on. The empire not only facilitated the logistics and footed the bill for large-scale councils, but also influenced council procedures. Emperors, either personally on or through their proxies, often presided over council sessions. In many cases, the imperial chancellery was involved in shaping the agenda for councils. At a certain stage, especially during and after the reign of Justinian, the implementation of council decisions was ensured by imperial authority, which imposed them as state laws. On the one hand, this meant that the council decisions were quickly and effectively implemented. On the other hand, it encouraged the church to self-censor in order to make its decision acceptable to the state. The state promoted the holding of councils, hoping that they would contribute to the cohesion of society and the legitimacy of imperial power. However, imperial intervention could not completely eliminate all the risks for the state that the conciliarity carried. And even the most carefully organized and discussed and thought through imperial councils remained unpredictable. Because of this unpredictability and the risks of political destabilization of the empire, the latter often refrained from supporting conciliar events. Full-fledged councils began to be replaced by smaller, in terms of participants, and more controlled synodal events and institutions. The most popular institution with reduced conciliarity became known as the Endymondian Synod. I don't even know how to say this better in Ukrainian, just endymusa. Endymusa means that the synod is attended by hierarchs who are in one place. This is the permanent synod. Well, it's not the very precise. The idea is very close, but not absolutely so. That's why I prefer using the endymus term. So it was participated by the hierarchs who were accidentally or intentionally or permanently in one place, in one city. Usually that was Constantinople. In most cases, this was Constantinople, as I've already mentioned, which never lacked visiting bishops. Well, 50% of the bishops resided in the capital more or less permanently. And some stayed for a short time, some stayed longer because they did not want or could not stay in their sees. And sometimes these were the bishops even from different patriarchies, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, etc. There were even patriarchs from these sees who permanently resided in the capital. And now something similar to Constantinople are the Athens, where different bishops from different patriarchates reside right now. As the universal councils became increasingly important in church life, the role of the See of Constantinople, which hosted them, also increased. And the patriarchs of Constantinople were the conveners and presidents of Endymus, while other patriarchs played secondary roles. And this conciliar institution thus contributed to the rise of the Constantinople jurisdictional monarchy in the East. And as a result, we have to deal with the two monarchies in Middle Ages, so that's Rome and Constantinople. So for the Byzantine state, it became too expensive to sponsor. It became too expensive to sponsor full-fledged pan-imperial councils. And in addition, the shrinking territory of the empire made it impossible for more bishops to attend. And as a result, again, the problem of the roads were closed and it was not possible to get to the place where the council was held. As a result, the main type of council became the endymus. And after the most of Eastern territories came under the control of Muslim states, the endymus became the only realistic form of conciliarity. Even the greatest gatherings of the modern age, such as the Council of Constantinople in 1872, were in fact, an endymus synodums. And this council had an expanded membership, making it greater. It was called Meson. That meant expanded and extended council. However, it was still a form of a reduced conciliarity. So this council in Constantinople cannot even be called local because it was just an extended council of those who were present in Constantinople at that time. Tsarist Russia attempted to convene great councils imitating the ecumenical councils of the first millennium. These were such attempts as as the animation when they were trying to replicate some medieval events. So this is what the Tsarist Russia was trying to do. These councils, or Russian councils or Muscovite councils, and times when it still was called the Muscovite state, were designed to reflect the growing prestige of the Muscovite rules in the Orthodox world. One of such was the so-called Stoglavy 100-headed council convened in 1551 by the Tsar Ivan IV the Terrible. The purpose of this council was to resolve a dispute between the followers of Niall Sorsky and Joseph Wolodzki, who held opposing views on church property. There were other issues there as well, but that was one of the reasons why it was called. I will have to apologize, but it would be very good if you could approach the conclusions to your speech. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. All right, let me then skip the Russians. All right, let me then speak about the simulacra of Catholicity. Well, Russians are most interesting. Russians, this is what is most interesting to me. I personally am interested in them. All right, then maybe I will be able to add that during the Q&A session. All right. In the early history of the church, there were periods when councils met quite frequently. Some periods, such as between the ecumenical councils of 325 and 381, had so many synodal events that the history of the church during this period can be characterized as a continuous synodomachy. Periods of intense conciliarity were replaced by periods of conciliar stagnation. And during these periods, various simulacra of councils arose. And this was the institution of the Pentarchy, the communion of 5 patriarchal sees: Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. The sees maintained contact with each other through correspondence and sometimes through personal meetings of the patriarchs. Their agreement or disagreement on doctrinal, ethical, and canonical issues effectively replaced the agreement that the councils provided. The Pentarchy is sometimes presented as an institution of conciliarity. I would argue that it was the opposite. In essence, the Pentarchy attempted to replace the ecumenical councils after those failed to preserve the integrity of the church and society in Byzantium, especially after the Christological disputes in the 5th and 6th centuries. Thus, for about a century and a half after the Council of Constantinople in 553, no pan-imperial council was held. Instead of councils, a pentarchy of patriarchs was promoted as the best way to resolve the theological and political issues facing the entire empire and its churches. However, the strategy of replacing councils with a pentarchy ultimately failed. The pentarchy, in particular, proved incapable of resolving the issue of monothelitism in the 7th century. The consensus of all 5 members of this patriarchal club, including the Pope Honorius, supported the monoenergetic monothelite doctrine promoted by Emperor Heraclius. The deadlock into which the Pentarchy had led the church was only broken by the 6th Ecumenical Council held in Constantinople in 680-681. The history of the monothelite controversy demonstrated that nothing could replace complete conciliarity in the church. The conciliar Dark Ages were usually replaced by conciliar Renaissance. The 19th and 20th century, in particular, were periods of the revival of conciliarity in both the Christian East and the West. The idea of conciliarity renewed the connection with the idea of the people of God in accordance with the principles of conciliarity in the Christian era in the beginning. The idea was formulated, for example, in the famous letter of the Eastern Patriarch, published in response to the letter of Pius IX. And the answer of the Orthodox is no. Neither the patriarchs nor the councils could then introduce innovations among us, because the defender of religion is the body of the church itself, the people themselves who wish their religious service to be always unchanged and the same kind as that of their ancestors. The process of national awakening in the Balkans and the liberation of Orthodox Greeks, Bulgarians, Serbs, Romanians, and other peoples from the rule of the Ottoman Empire gave rise to a new form of conciliarity. And this was the so-called institution of the spiritual assembly, which included hierarchs, clergy, and laity. These assemblies decided not only ecclesiastical, but also sometimes political issues. In other words, they tried to be as comprehensive as possible, but always within the boundaries of the nation state. In this sense, they were a product of their time, marked by modernity and the spring of nations. Such assemblies were popular in Greece and other Balkan countries. The culmination of this form of synodality was the so-called Moscow Local Council held in 1917-1918. It was rather a late case of the meetings of the clergy and laity practiced in the Balkans, but at the same time, it appeared to be the most well-prepared and the most comprehensive emancipatory agenda. This agenda included the separation of church and state, the aggiornamento of modernity. I believe it appeared during this council. It recognized the leading role of the laity and the diaconal nature of hierarchical service. The program of the council was only partially implemented in the Russian church as we know it. And it caused the appearance of the local council. Such institution is the highest body in the Russian Orthodox Church, and according to the statutes of this church, the authority of the local council, whose delegates include both lay people and clergy, is superior to the authority of the bishop's council. And perhaps this is why during the time of Patriarch Cyril, this form of council practically ceased to be practiced. So if I have 2 more minutes, I can speak about the Pan-Orthodox Cathedral, but if not, then I will stop there. Okay, we'll give you 2 more minutes. So all Orthodox councils during the period of the conciliar revival of the 19th and 20th centuries were local. We call them, well, pomistny in Ukrainian, but it's better to say that they are local because we have this definition. However, in the 1920s, Orthodox hierarchs conceived the idea of holding a pan-Orthodox council. There were several sporadic and unsuccessful attempts to convene one until this matter was put on the rails of systematic preparation at the pan-Orthodox meeting of the Greek island of Rhodes in 1961. During this period, when the Second Vatican Council was being prepared, the Orthodox concept of synodality was renewed. If previous councils had been convened to resolve urgent issues, then the pan-Orthodox Council, as envisaged in Rhodes, was to gather for the sake of just gathering. And that is the main difference between the Pan-Orthodox Council and other councils. The future Pan-Orthodox Council was called upon to demonstrate the spirit of conciliarism with which the Orthodox churches identify themselves. And in other words, for this council, the process of conciliarism was more important than its decision. So we can say that this Pan-Orthodox Council had a very romantic idea of Orthodox self-edification as the basis, that Orthodoxy is about conciliarity. And to demonstrate that this so-called myth of conciliarity, which became very popular in the 19th century, they decided to convene this Pan-Orthodox Council. And as we know, in the end, in 2016, they managed to convene this council, but unfortunately, this council could not demonstrate the principle of conciliarity, which the churches would live by. 4 churches did not go to Crete. But no matter how, what kind of council it was, it still became the voice of conciliarity of our days. And this voice is not triumphant. It attempts to articulate the symptoms of the crisis. Among them is the decline in the participation of the laity in church decision-making. And such a trend can be observed, for example, in the case of the Russian church, where amendments to its statutes aim to destroy the authority of local councils and restore bishops' councils as the highest decision-making authority. There are clear tendencies to replace full synodality with its some versions or even simulacra. However, despite the pressure of circumstances and anti-synodal tendencies, synodality in the Christian East continues to evolve. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for such a comprehensive and detailed presentation of the evolution, how it all started. Of course, we could listen to you ad infinitum, but this is such an interesting topic. Actually, your presentation is extremely interesting. Thank you. I just wanted to probably say something about mosaics. Yes, we have different stones, and when we have this golden pattern, there was the tradition to have these stones placed under different angles, and then you have this reflection, and it creates an image of a star night. Yes, this is an independent mosaic. Our second panelist, I would like to invite Reverend Dr. Ivan Datsko, the president of the UCU Institute of Ecumenical Studies, who will tell us more about the development of synodality in the diaspora and to actually continue with the development of synodality in Ukraine. Glory to Jesus Christ. When I was informed about the topic of this seminar, I thought about the article late Father Dr. Igor Monchak. And there are two reasons why I asked for this article to be read. I do not know if you did the second thing. However, I hope that you read this article. Why did I want to use this article? Because this article essentially describes all attempts of the Greek Catholic Church to restore synodal structure. And also, I helped Father Dr. Monchak in his writing of this article. And there you will see October the 30th of 2016. That is the date when this article was published in the journal Patriarchate. Now, of course, I will try to be very laconic, trying to cover the 25 pages of this article, but I would like to focus on the concept of the Roman Church. We know that we had the Beresteisk Synod, but after that, for 130 years, Rome did not allow us to have the councils or synods. Even Cobrin synod, who Metropolitan Joseph wanted to have. But in Zamost in 1720, and also in 1891, then we go to the 20th century when even Metropolitan Andrei was not allowed to call his assemblies, these meetings. However, they were considered to be conferences. There was a meeting in Lviv in 1927, and in 1929 in Rome there was another assembly convened. At these councils, different issues were discussed related to liturgies, legal one, ritual ones, and in Journal Halicka Neva, there was this information that the biggest problem of unity is a lack of coordination, the fragmentation of the churches, because we know that the right of metropolitan bishops was given to Rome. because they couldn't find an agreement which liturgicon, which order to accept. What was also special about these conferences or these assemblies, because we couldn't call them synods, was the presence of not only bishops of Galicia metropolis, Dionysian Rade, Vasil Takat, Petro Gabay, Josip Hanulia, as well as many others. And then they decided to have these conferences every 5 years. But in fact, they didn't fulfill this promise. Unity of rite, liturgy, church discipline, these were the topics of these conferences. The second assembly was convened in Rome, dedicated to Ivan Buchko. There was another synod of 4 exarchs convened by Metropolitan Andrei, and these were Ukrainians, but for that father who was from Belarus. It was in 1939, in 1941, after the first Bolshevik occupation of Halachina. Now we continue with the period after the Second World War. The liberation of the Patriarch Yosef Slipai Maxim Hermanyuk played an important role. He was young, and he had a lot of respect of Cardinal Ciceran, who was the prefect of congregation of the Eastern churches, because he had French upbringing. In February of 1957, the occasion of the installation of the first Ukrainian Metropolitan of Canada in Winnipeg, also Akon Kosciuszko participated. Then in Philadelphia, on the occasion of the creation of the Philadelphia Metropolitanate, headed by Konstantin Bachevich. That Metropolitan Bohachevsky had it. Then they appointed a secretary from New York. I was present at this conference in 1959 when another event, another 30 years after gathering of our bishops, we once again had Bohachevsky, Kirill Bohachevsky there, so that became a practice. Then in 1960, there was the Episcopate Conference on the occasion of the World Eucharistic Congress in Munich, and in 1962, there was the conference held in Winnipeg, where we already had the delegate, Monsignor Sebastiano Baggio. Then we officially had the name, which was temporary, the Conference of Catholic Bishops of the Ukrainian Rite, not Ruthenian Rite, but they were not legitimate. Then we continue with the Second Council of the Vatican. You can read the information that is marked there about all the processes. Отець Father Ivan Хoma. Also to have restoration of the activities of Ukrainian Theological Society, to publish the book by Chubati about the history of Ukraine. Then we had the second Vatican Council, where we already have it documented. We have some photographs in Papal Collegium with participation of Maximus IV Sayen, who was well known as the fighter for the rights of Eastern churches. And in 1963, the second session, Josip Lipai, the Metropolitan, took over these functions, and right from the start, he reminded our episcopates that the conference is not a permanent thing. It's important to move further to synodality. I also would like probably to skip some of the issues which were discussed and consider the translation of liturgy, the creation of episcopate in Poland, about Ukrainian states, and there was also this resolution to have synods every 3 years. This is page 11 of this article. It was important to have synods, not conferences, according to his beatitude. Why? Because it corresponded to several principles that Rome uses even now. When in Latin Church we had the practice resumed of a papal synod in 1967, it had an advisory function, and it requires approbation of Rome. However, for Joseph, it was important to have jus administrativum ad liberativum executivum, the administrative right, strategic right, and executive right. However, the most important thing was that they can choose and appoint and bishops. And yesterday we also have this discussion. Father Demit underlined it, that in Eastern churches, that jurisdiction is interpreted as the personal, lex presumitur personalis. When in Latin church, they follow the principle of territoriality. Eugenio Pacelli wrote about that, who was a doctor, Pope Pius XII. He sticked only to the Latin principle. After the death of Patriarch Joseph in times of Lubachevsky, there was the Code of Canons of Eastern churches. They used Assemblea Generale as the council of local church. But in fact, the council didn't have any rights. Our council had way more rights than the synod, because it were a hierarchy, and other participants and the clergy, the faithful. Rome started creating some problems, and even our bishops did not listen to Patriarch Joseph. because in October of 1967, he also wanted to convene an assembly, but they didn't allow him. Then we had another synod dedicated to St. Sophia Cathedral. We also had a bishop from Brasov. Then there was the issue of patriarchate. It was raised. However, Rome did not recognize the synodal structure. However, his beatitude on the occasion of the segregation in 1971, there was 365 years and 320 years of the Uzhhorod Union celebration. Then we had the Patriarch Constitution approbated of the Ukrainian Church. Vasil Vsevolod was freed, and his beatitude communicated with him and worked with him to emphasize on the unity of the territory of Ukraine. Velichkovsky was also considered to be the member of the permanent synod. Then in 1973, in November, there was another synod. And then in 1975, in the hall of the UCU in Rome, July 10 to July 20, there was another meeting where they also discussed the creation of a Saint Sophia Society. Then in the following year, in 1976, similar meetings of the Episcopate of the Ukrainian Catholic Church were held in the hall of the UCU in Rome. Then there was a trip to Australia in 1973. When the Pope Paul VI passed away, there was the Synod in Rome in November with participation of priests, and we know that some of them were already bishops: Huzar, Hrancheshin, Homa, Muzyczka, Pospíšil. The key topic becomes the preparation for the celebration. The same happened in 1979, where we can see a set of different resolutions. The Pope allowed us to convene synods. It was in March of 1980. And then we had different agendas. So yes, not to take up too much of your time, please read this article, but our bishops who were not even known, or at least not officially, they participated as Huzar, Homa. In 1980, there was another synod convened. The Lviv Council. After 1983, we had the statute of the synod. We had new Secretary General after the death of Patriarch Yosef, when we already had Miroslav Ivan. It was in September, October of 1985. The church was no longer in exile, and they were preparing for the 1000th anniversary of baptism. In June of 1871, when we celebrated the baptism of Rus, there was the meeting on the baptism of Rus, and in 1989, there was a preparation of the meeting between Gorbachev and the Pope. Moreover, there was a four-party discussion, and in 1990, in June, there was another extremely important synod in the Vatican in the presence of the Pope John Paul II, and in 1991, before they returned to Lviv. The rest of events took place in Lviv. Thank you for attention. I really tried to respect the time allocated for my presentation. Thank you for your presentation. Yes, absolutely. It's important for us to keep going, but because I also want to participate in the discussion, so I will be here. Yes, absolutely. Because you have demonstrated to us the struggle it took to establish synodality in our church. It was an internal strife as well as the one which was related to the Rome. See, yes, everything revolves around the topic of patriarchate. So the next panelist, Reverend Dr. Oleg Hortik, lecturer at the Ternopil Higher Theological Seminary. What is the seminary? Ternopil Seminary. Is that the Greek Catholic seminary?
Thank you. I just don't know him, but I will know him now. Well, first of all, I would like to, use some illustrations on our screen. Well, they're mainly text, but they will still help us focus on some key moments. We have already heard today about the Greek terminology, which was presented to us by Archimandrite Cyril Hovorun. It's important for us to remember that our church, which took Christianity from Byzantium, and everything that was important for the Byzantine Church at that time was brought to us with certain modifications, because even the traditional term synod, which was the only one to mean the local and universal councils, came to the Old Slavonic Church with the term swor, meaning to gather, which turned into the word sobor in Ukrainian. And today we even heard that these words are used interchangeably, but in Greek terminology, they only have the word synod to denote these church gatherings. And in the practice of the Ukrainian church, especially the Church of Kievan Rus, we have had this practice of using the term sobor for these purposes. We haven't had any other terms for many centuries. It all was all those gatherings that were in the churches of the Kievan Rus and then in Ukraine were denoted by the word sobor, which in Old Slavonic language means to gather, which basically is the same as in Greek. The idea is to come together to consider some important issues, in this case, the issues of church life. And also when it comes to the practice of the Ukrainian church and its first 600 years of history, the sobors or the councils gathered all the bishops, but also representatives of clergy and lay people. Of course, there were some limitations. We can't say that this was very extensive meetings and that laity was extensively represented there. Well, the main participants of these councils were still the bishops and the metropolitan of the Kiev Church, and they considered different issues and challenges of the times together to find a solution. They needed to see them, to discuss them, to think about them, and arrive at a conclusion of how to resolve these problems. So this was the idea of these councils of the church in the Kievan Rus and then in Ukraine. Later on, of course, the Ukrainian church decided to join the universal church, the ecumenical church. And we should also remember that traditions were preserved. The tradition of the councils was preserved. And even the first meetings were held in the same format as previously. For example, the Cobran Council of the Union Church. Among other things, they had there the clergy and the lay people. And what is usual for us now is to hear the word synod, because we look into the past from the point of view of the present. But at that time, if we look even at the Common Council in the title and in the official documents and the language in which these decisions were taken, these were the old Slavonic, old Ukrainian language. And we can see the term sobor there, the council. So that is important to note. These councils, which later started being called the synods, were not so many in this ecumenical format in the Union Church, but it's not just these several councils we have heard about and we know about from the history of the church, like the Kobrin, Zamoyski, or Lviv councils. Our bishops did gather because there were challenges. There are always challenges for the church, for the faithful. So the bishops gathered to consider various matters of everyday life and challenges for everyday life for their churches and their faithful. And in between these famous councils, which were convened, they also had regular meetings in a smaller form, the one which is more usual for us today, where mostly bishops gathered together. And these meetings were not called the synods or councils, but they were called congresses or meetings. And this shows us a different reality. Why do we have this duplication of terms like council and synod? Since the Ukrainian Union Church has become part of the Universal Church, there used to be the same rules of church life, and these rules automatically made the Union Church follow them. So these were the same rules that existed in the Roman Catholic Church. They applied to life and the possibility to meet of the Ukrainian Union Church. And therefore, at that time, there was this term, provincial synod. And quite frequently we can hear about this duplication of councils and synods. we frequently use and hear these words as synonyms, as the ones that can be used interchangeably, but this is what you can do in everyday life, in everyday speech. But for us, the Union Church, this was the continuation of the old tradition from the Church of Kievan Rus. But to have these meetings, it was necessary to follow the procedure according to the established rules, and to do that, they used the terminology which was current at the time, which was well known for the people, for the king's officials, and so on. And that is why we can see these terms also in literature and in documents. They have this provincial synod or simply synod mentioned there. The practice of council convention in terms, well, stopped at that terminology when the codex of the Eastern churches was introduced, when they regulated this matter for the Eastern churches, especially when it came to synodality. This document, which you can also see on the screen, has one document for the councils of the Ukrainian Church. Well, according to the Codex Canonum Ecclesiarum Orientalum, we have 4 requirements there. So the Code of Canons defines only 3, which you can see on the screen, but in the practice of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, we have also the 4th type, which was introduced quite recently. And in that old meaning of the word, as it was used by this Byzantium Church and the Kievan Rus Church, the word synod was used when denoting this first item. You can see that's the Synod of the Bishops of the Greek Catholic Church. As you can see from the title itself, this is the synod where the bishops gathered, bishops only. And this present practice of synodality presupposes this format first and foremost in regard to the bishops. And that's what we can see in the title, in the name of the event. The Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church is the legislative body with the mandate to also perform some judicial functions. But the Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church decides the vector of development of the Greek Catholic Church in general. So this is the key meeting. And we can go back to the olden times, the old ecumenical councils, when the bishops, the clergy, and the laity gathered to discuss the challenges for the church, to see how to behave and what to do next. So this is a view at the present, but also a view into the future. What is it that we have to work on? What do we have to do for the purposes of development, so that the church community feels well, develops well, and so that everything is all right? This is the key body of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, and it has the right to adopt the laws for the faithful of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. It also unites all bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in the world. All bishops belong to the Synod of Bishops. So if there is a meeting, then all bishops from around the world come to this meeting to discuss the current affairs and the current issues. If you're interested in what is discussed and what is decided by the Synod, you can go to the website, the official website of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. There's a section there with the respective documents, and in that section we can find all documents and resolutions of the Synod of Bishops. And you can use the search function to find it. You write the word resolutions, and you will see all the resolutions of the Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church for the last 25 years, if I'm not mistaken. And we can read these documents and understand what was considered, what decisions were taken, and so on. The activity of the Synod is regulated by the already mentioned Code of Canons of the Eastern Churches. The next synodal format of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic churches is the Synod, which was established in the 2021, and this is the Council of Archbishops. So these are this is the council of those bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church who serve in Ukraine only, and they gather to consider the issues and decide what to do with the challenges which are relevant for Ukraine. The Synod, as compared to the previous ones, doesn't have legal power, so they don't adopt the resolutions which are legally binding. But the idea is to conduct consultations and discussions and meetings, how to respond to the problems of the faithful in Ukraine, how to respond to the situation in Ukraine. So what do? Well, mainly they look at the challenges which are related to the pastoral care. And they also may resolve some matters related to the liturgies and rites, but the main area of competence of this council is pastoral care. And of course, we have now many challenges which are related to war in Ukraine. So the Synod discusses these matters and adopts certain principles which we have to follow and to solve the topical problems in Ukraine. In addition, the Code of Canons, I will go back to it just for a moment because I probably haven't focused on that matter enough. Well, the Code of Canons of the Eastern Churches does not presuppose having a synod like that. So we cannot find it in the Code of Canons of the Eastern Churches. So this is something characteristic of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church only. The synod was created by the resolution of the Synod of Bishops because they are the legislative body and they have the legal mandate and power, and they can establish other councils if necessary. So that is why we now have this Synod of Ukrainian bishops. So it follows its statute, which was approved by the Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. The Code of Canons of Eastern Churches also presupposes that there should be a metropolitan synod. It is actually included into this document, and this is the synod uniting the bishops from a certain metropolitan area, and each metropolitan can actually convene this kind of synod, it also cannot adopt any legally binding documents. And these are mainly the meetings and consultations so that the bishops who work in a certain church province can discuss and resolve certain matters. If you look into the statutes of this metropolis synod, we can see that the purpose of activity of the synod is to enact the resolutions and laws which were adopted by the Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. And this is not just some executive structure. This is mainly consultative, advisory, and coordination body, so that there is a common vision of the situation, and so that some decisions can be adopted. And also, the Code of Canons of Eastern Churches presupposes another kind of synods, that's the permanent synod, and this is the institution which is based on the synods that used to be in a part of the practice of the Constantinople hierarchy, and we have heard about it today. There's the Endemus Synod, the Latin correspondent in the Code of Canons, that's Synodus Permanens, which means the permanent synod, although we cannot speak about the direct parallel to the Endemus Synod. But the idea of the permanent synod is the representation of the bishops who convene more frequently, especially when there is a necessity to get an agreement or to get some advice from this synod. The Archbishop convenes this synod to discuss the current matters which cannot be postponed, because other synods convene from time to time, and sometimes it's necessary to adopt urgent decisions as soon as possible and not to wait. So that is why there's this option of convening the synod, which would help the head of the church to resolve certain matters.
What is key right now in everything that we have been discussing? It's important for us to be aware of the fact that the Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church plays the most important role. They resolve the most important issues and address the most important matters. Yes, if you analyze these resolutions, the topics that the Synod of Bishops of the UGCC is dealing with, we can see that actually what is topical for the Synod, for the bishops of the entire church, all the bishops of the church across the globe, to make sure that we have actually a living community of the faithful of our church, because we have the faithful in different countries of the world. They are separated by distance. There are some irreversible processes as assimilation, which brings another difficulty for those people who were born in other countries, not to lose the connection with their church. That is why this is the problem that Senate right now sees. What is the best way for us to organize our activities to make sure that the UGCC, the entire community of the faithful, becomes a dynamic community, a live community, that they take decisions, adopt different resolutions, take measures, and it's important that they are enforced in their dioceses, and to analyze what is happening. Another challenge, of course, these are refugees, the war. We understand that this is a challenge for the Senate. There are many activities devoted to address this matter. Then there is another concerning problem for the bishops of the UGCC is limitations of possibilities, because according to the code of Eastern churches, different regulations, different laws, they are mandatory only within the primary territory, namely Ukraine. But if we take the rest of the world, there is no obligation, and also there are mechanisms in the code as well. But these are only liturgical and ritual issues adopted by the Synod. They are binding across the globe. This is a challenge for the Synod of Bishops. That they're also considering the possibilities of taking better care of their faithful, to find different ways to resolve the limitations which are imposed in legal perspective for our church and its head. We also know about the modern concept of synodality in the Catholic Church and its influence on the UGCC. Pope Francis in October of 2021 introduced it. He announced a new concept of synodality. He is speaking about synodal church and synodality. Of course, this is not something new for us, for the Ukrainian church, for Eastern churches on the whole. However, I would like to dwell on the idea of synodality and the concept of synodality. Pope Francis imposes in this concept, and he refers to the etymology of synod, to go together, to move together, following one path. Of course, it can refer to the situation that we had in the first century of Christianity, and Pope Francis believes that we need to change the focus of attention from institutionalism and centralism towards the entire realm of the church, because the church is the faithful. It's not the clergy. These are not institutions in the direct sense of this word. These are the faithful, the body of Christ. That is why his idea is to include all the faithful one, laymen, laity, the clergy, baptized, to resolve relevant matters not only by the effort of bishops, but also newly baptized laity, not only bishops in the clergy, the faithful ones. This is the task for the Synod of the bishops of the UGCC, the Papal Synod, which was dealing with this topic and rethinking of the concept of synodality. There are also there is also some emphasis placed on the importance of laity by the clergy, to have better engagement of laity in life of the church and also in life of different structures. It doesn't mean that we are changing the principle of the institute of the synod. Francis Pope and the current Pope state that there is no change there. We have the status of bishops and they have their own power, but it's really important to listen to the faithful. That is why we had all those stages in 2021 till 2025, the preparation to the synod, where we had different discussions in different groups until it reached the Pope himself. That is why there are some key principles and statements of the papal synod. Decentralization issue is amongst one of them, to have more power and more participation in the life of church of Eastern churches, and also participation in church of the newly baptized, the faithful, and also to engage them in different structures at different levels of church life. There were some other key topics: the preservation society of the principles, the principle of the preservation of the institute of family, marriage. Another important aspect would be the development of theology for deepening and advancing synodality, also formation of ecumenical processes. This is also another task for the Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. These are the statements from the Synod of the Pope for all local churches and episcopates, dioceses, to fulfill these promises. Yes, I didn't want to interfere and to interrupt you, because it's been of great interest to listen to you. Thank you for showing us that the synodal process does not only uh, revolves around one point, but that from the synodal process, the Eastern churches can also benefit and learn a lot. Thank you. And last but not least is Professor Volodymyr Buraha, Vice Rector of the Kyiv Theological Academy of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Synodality, Thrash, Orthodoxy in Ukraine, the 17th, 21st century. Yeah, so I know that probably everyone is already tired, but I will try my best to make sure that you are still awake, because, well, my plan was also to discuss what was happening before the 17th century, but actually we can say that since Kiev Rui's time, we have some evidence that in Kiev metropolis we always had these councils. So we had the election of metropolitans. And in the 17th century, there was a newly established tradition to have these councils and dedicated to different topics for discussion. We can see that there is evidence about these synods being convened on a more or less regular basis in the Kiev metropolis. And in the 17th century, these are not only councils of bishops, but also the clergy, the laity, the monks. And this tradition was broken after 1686, though the documents dating back to 1686, when the Kiev metropolis came under the jurisdiction of the Moscow Patriarch, did not foresee any changes. So it was claimed directly that the metropolitan was to be elected directly, but after 1686, only two of them were elected in Kiev, and they were endorsed in Moscow and in St. Petersburg. Then, when we had the Holy Senate established, we didn't have any councils in Kiev, and metropolitans were appointed by the Holy Synod. This is a very important topic. After 1721, what we see is a serious shift in terminology, because we had the term of council, which was traditionally used since Kiev Rus times, and this is an equivalent to the Greek term synod. Since 1721, we see that there is a synod as a separate body, and then we have synod as a bigger assembly. So then we can see the divergence of these terms in Russian vocabulary as well as in other Slavic languages. That is why I have to speak about the synod, which was established in Petersburg, which impacted other local churches. On the one hand, it was considered to be a permanent council. On the other hand, that was a collective replacement of the patriarch. So that is something that equals the patriarchate authority. So if the patriarch is on his own, then he can be wrong about something, but this is a collegial body, which is more trustworthy. That was not really a council. That was a replacement of the higher leadership and power in an individual church, and the status of the Senate in Russia as it was. There was also a special status of the Russian Senate indicated by the charter of the Patriarch of Constantinople, Jeremiah, the 3rd of September 23, 1723, in which he recognizes the Russian Senate as his brother in Christ, because Father Erkeman Wright mentioned that it has a feminine gender, and actually Synod is his sister in Christ. He uses the term sister. He recognizes Synod, but in the official Russian translation, to say that Synod is a sister of a patriarch, that's something you cannot have, and that is why in all translations you have brother. Though in the original language, it is a sister in Christ. This is a very unique status. This is the body which is considered to be a permanent council. However, this is a narrow circle of hierarchy which were allowed to participate in church management at the highest level, disregarding everyone who's left. That is why, in this context, we have this juxtaposition of a synod and the council, because the synod is a narrow term based in Peterborough, and council is an assembly. And until 1917, they didn't have these assemblies for 200s. They didn't have it in the Russian tradition. It affected the Kiev metropolis, because it was considered to be one of dioceses. Only that is why we have this tradition broken, and we have synodality as something that is opposite to conciliarity, which is really important, because in the 19th century, local churches in the Balkan region wanted to replicate this model in one of the churches where they had a synodal system of management introduced. That is why this transition took place in the 18th century. Only in the 19th century, when the Russian Empire ceased to exist, it became possible to revive conciliarity, not synodality. And we know about the Synod of 1917-18, when we have the system established with the patriarch, then we have the Synod, and then we also have a local council. So we have this tradition of a synod. This is a circle of those who are headed by patriarch, and they participate in all activities. And a council is somebody which convenes every 3 years. So we have the council and we have the synod. However, after the Soviets were gained the rule after 1917, we didn't have any local councils. Even if we had them convened, I think that that was a rare case. In 1925, when the patriarch Tikhon died, it was not a new one. Then the deputy metropolitan Serhiy convenes a temporary synod, but these are hierarchy allowed the by those who were in power. So we have this synodality in the Soviet style, because we had the empire controlling the synod, and now the Soviet atheist power gains control of the synod. So these are the processes which took place in the Russian church. let's speak about Ukraine. In Ukraine, in 1917, it was possible to revive the Institute of Councils, and in 1917, in 1918, we also had Old Ukrainian Council, which was held. There were 3 sessions, which revived the practice that we had until the 17th century. And in 1917, there was the resolution adopted about its function in Ukraine, according to which these major councils were to be convened, and in between, the Synod was responsible, was consisting of all bishops. So this system was very similar to what they decided to have in the Russian Council, the Metropolitan, but the Synod in Ukraine was to be the gathering of all bishops, and the major council was participation of the clergy and laity every 3 years. But this system didn't work after 1917. Uh, the Soviets didn't allow to convene councils. The Ukrainian church, from its autonomous status, became isoarchate. It was narrowed down to this status, and actually, it existed in this form until 1990. There were some changes, and then finally, in 1990, we were back to the scheme which we had in 1918. It was originally envisioned, and in the regulation about the temporary highest power as related to the diocese, for the first time you had its official name, Ukrainian Orthodox Church. I think that is the first official document when we had this term used with reference to the diocese in Ukraine. Then we had the revival of this practice of autonomous rule in accordance with the documents of 1990. Once again, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, they create their own synod, and they acquire the right to convene regularly their council.
I'm very briefly describing everything. What do we have now? There are just several moments we have to pay attention to. In 1990, so that was back in times of Metropolitan Filaret Denisenko, the first Council of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was convened, and that is when the Synod was established. That was the Synod of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And then there was this system, there was the Metropolitan, and under his auspices, a Synod would be convened every 4 years, and the 4 bishops would be also part of this synod, and there also exists the Great Council, which is convened when necessary. Generally, such great councils with the participants of the bishops, clergy, and laity have been, well, summoned less than 10 times since 1990. So 1990, 1991, 1992, then 1997, 2011, and 2022. And that's it, I guess. So this is more of an extraordinary body which convenes quite rarely. What concerns the Bishops' Council, it has to be held every year. But the experience shows that the Bishops' Councils have not been convened after 2022, despite the fact that they have to be annual. But when it comes to the Synod, it has to be convened 4 times a year. After 1990, well, one more change which happened to the scheme, starting from 1992, well, so-called permanent member of the Synod appeared. So that means that the Synod of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and also in Kiev Patriarchate, because we proceeded from the same considerations at that point. So the scheme is the same. So in Kyiv Patriarchate, which seems to be still existing, they have the same situation. So the Synod consists of permanent members who are the majority of the Synod. So those are the members who regularly participate in the meetings. And then there are also some temporary members. And this is how this tendency appeared, that there is this small circle of bishops who participate in the Synod all the time, and they have like a kind of a blocking voice. And then there are the others who are summoned like once every 6 months. They change and they don't have that big an impact on decision-making processes. And this is what is still preserved. And it is interesting that in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the first composition of the Synod, the first composition of the permanent members were elected in 1992. And then when someone passed away, then the new person was selected by the Synod itself, and we can say that nowadays the Synod is actually electing its own members. So it's not the council delegating them, but the Synod electing them. And I think that this is one of the central problems of the existing system of management, because the Synod risks turning into a closed club where the majority of bishops cannot participate and not impact any decisions. And well, the last idea I wanted to focus on, I hope that we would have the report from the Orthodox Church of Ukraine about the system of higher management. But I should say that in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, we have this difference between the Synod and the Council. But in the statute of 2018, they defined that this is a body, the Synod is a body of 12 bishops. This is what was borrowed from the Latter Church. But when it was introduced in Ukraine, an amendment was made that an institute of permanent members of the Synod is introduced because there was something very useful for the Ukrainian practice. So they did not dare to refuse from this practice. So the Synod presupposes having 3 permanent members. So these are the 3 jurisdictions which joined their efforts, and their representatives have to be permanent members of the Synod. As far as I understand, we have 2 of them at the moment, because the third one is Patriarch Filaret, who doesn't participate in the meetings of the Synod, but he's considered to be the third permanent member. So it's interesting that this practice of permanent members of the Synod appeared in the second half of the 20th century in the Russian Orthodox Church, and then it migrated into the Kievan metropoly during Metropolitan Filaret, and then it was borrowed by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Kyiv Patriarchate, who preserved this practice. And even now, although in a different form, it is in the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. So as a conclusion, I would like to stress that the terms synodality and conciliarity are distinguished in the Orthodox context, because the Council and the Synod are different bodies with different powers and different compositions. But nevertheless, regular convention of councils and broad involvement of bishops into the resolution of church affairs is provided for by the statutory documents of all Orthodox churches in Ukraine, although they are implemented somewhat differently. Thank you for your patience, for your attention, and for your understanding. Thank you very much. There's always this problem with the speakers who know a lot and have a lot to share, because then we spend almost all our time listening to them and we have almost no time for discussion. But as a moderator, I would like to use this opportunity to ask Father Oleg a question. I had a problem when we translated the documents of the Orthodox Catholic Council in Ravenna. So there was the problem of how to call it, the conciliarity or synodality, because in English they use both the words conciliarity and synodality. So we followed the Greek example. The Commission defined it as synodality. Those are two separate notions, the synodality and so the conciliarity is higher than synodality. Sorry, I forgot what I was thinking about. So this is a question to Father Oleg. So the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, which has this difference between the synod and council, so they when one of those has a broader representation. So isn't it connected with this tradition which Professor Buraha mentioned, where, well, I don't know whether the Greeks have anything similar, but I think we also took it from that tradition. I think that when we speak about the documents, we have to translate it the way it was used then, not looking at it from the present day perspective, but imagining that we are in that century. So if they used it as a concilium, then it's Sobor in Ukrainian. So I believe we need to follow the terminology of those times, not transposing it with the present day terminology. You know, there was this discussion of how to translate the documents of the Zamoyski Council. Is it a council or a synod? Because we have this duplication. So we have to think about what it looked like at that time, and the hierarchy itself, and what it looked like later. And we have this tradition that we called it the council, well, Sobor in Ukrainian. That's why we say Zamoyski Sobor, the Zamoyski Council. According to the Roman Catholic terminology, it's a synod, but from our ecclesiological thinking and our approach, it's a council, because we used to have councils only. We didn't used to have synods. So the word Sobor, council, has the Slavic root, and then synod has the Latin root. They had synods, no councils. We had councils, no synods. Yes, the commission actually followed the Greek tradition, and they called it not conciliarity but synodality, although we can translate it the way we want. We have to think about it as, well, we use it right now. When we talk to, people who live in the present times, we use the present day terminology. Does anyone online or on site have any questions? If there are no questions, unfortunately, our Archimandrite Hovorun had to leave us earlier because he said that he has electricity cut off. Father Ivan left us. Well, I haven't left you, but there's no point in discussing because, we don't have any time. I respected the time, the others didn't, so there's no point. All right, then we will finish our last meeting for today. And first of all, I would like to thank our presenters who participated in this discussion for their interesting presentations. And I would like to thank our interpreters who had a hard time interpreting this today. And I would like to thank the French fund Lourdes Dorian for supporting this event, which is a part of a broader project about the ecumenical identity of Eastern Catholics. And I would also like to thank for the support of the 18th Ecumenical Social Week to Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And those who are staying here are invited for dinner. Thank you very much.